Good morning, everybody. Baruch Hashem, we are continuing on with our Maamer, Leisim Shakela, full devotion. We are actually doing really well. I hope everyone's enjoying it. Seems like everyone is from the feedback I got on personal messages. Okay, so I want, just so we don't lose the flow, what we're going to do is we're going to do a short, so the parak 1, the first Aleph, Ice Aleph, what we had a question, right? We read a pasuk, and the pasuk said that we're meant to get all these beautiful brachas, and it explained it more in depth, all these beautiful brachas with parnasa, with long life and good health, and with children. Not only that, but it explained it even more in depth. Then the Rebbe brought up this question. It's like, one second, we have to look at the pasuk before that and realize that it was kind of telling us if we do the avodah to be able to connect to Hashem, so then we will get all these brachas. And not only that, but all these brachas are on the one hand a command, like we're meant to be doing these things, we're meant to be doing the things to receive them. And on the other hand, it's also a promise. Once we do these things, we'll be able to receive them. And then so then we left off with this concept that we need to serve Hashem. We need to do our part in order to receive the bracha. So that's kind of like the lead up. So what are we talking about exactly? Then the second ice, we discussed this whole concept, and we said, as I explained, in most Maamer, we bring up this concept. Okay, in order to understand this properly, we need to understand, etc. So what do we need to understand? The concept of avodah, the concept of a master and a servant, and whether a master, according to the laws of the world, a master needs something from the servant, and so therefore when the servant does something, the servant is actually fulfilling the need of the master. So every time somebody, I ask for a favor, let's say, and somebody comes and helps me, I needed something and that person fulfilled me, which means I have a lack within myself. So there's a question that we leave off with, and we brought in a lot of psukim which said, does Hashem really need us? Does our time matter? Do our actions matter to him? Hashem is all perfect. How is it possible that we make a difference to him? And then on the other hand, we brought other psukim which are very, very valid, which said it does make a difference. The more we do Torah mitzvahs, the more we give Hashem greatness and holiness and more power, so to speak. And chas v'shalom, when somebody doesn't do Torah mitzvahs, it actually diminishes his power. So then we leave off with a very, very strong question which says, does our avodah matter? Or does it make a difference to Hashem? So now, on the third ice, we're going to come and we're going to discuss it from the level of Kabbalah. We're going to go into the Kabbalistic levels, and then we're going to discuss and we're going to try and answer this question. Have in mind, though, that later on in the Maamer and Ice Hey, we're going to reapproach this question. I mean, we're definitely going to continue because this is the question of the Maamer. We're going to reapproach it from a more Chassidic, like Chabad Chassidus perspective, which is our avodah. What does it actually mean for us? Okay, so hold cup. I'm gonna try and do my best to explain the Kabbalah as clearly as possible and not get lost. So what I decided I was gonna do is I made a diagram, and I'm gonna try to explain as many of the concepts in Kabbalah beforehand. That way we'll go into the Maamer already knowing what we're talking about, and then we'll be able to go with the flow of the Maamer and follow it. Okay, so I hope everyone can see I don't know if you guys see it backwards. I'm not sure exactly, but I hope you're able to follow. So here we have, this is creation, so to speak. This is how the world, and again, I made a diagram, but obviously this is not physical existences in the world, which are called, one is called, it's a physical location, you can fly up there, called Chachma or whatever. But just for us to be able to understand the quote unquote structure of the world, the creation of the world. So up here, as I spoke about before, is that before the world had a creation, it was only God and himself, and that was it. It was nothing else. Then Hashem had a desire to create something. So that desire it created this concept of Keser, right? So Kesser, in relation to Kesser and the 10 spheres, Kesser is the top crown, right? So for example, when we think, it's in our head, but a crown, which is the word for Kesser, lays on top of the head, right? So it's not part of the thought process, it's just something that sits on top. So too with Kesser. Kesser is this concept of something above it. So Kesser is this wonderful connector between Atzilus, which can't be separated into worlds, although at different times in Chassidus we do go and we analyze what's inside of Atzilus, so to speak. But in our level of understanding at this point in our Maamer, Atzilus is godliness that's beyond any level of separation or tzimtzum. Kesser is the little connector piece that goes from infinite godliness to God putting himself into different packages in order to be able to come down and make a world, okay? So Kesser is the connector. Kesser has two levels. One, the top level is called Atik, which I think essentially it's really not considered top, it's considered internal, because this is kind of like a funnel, right? So in a funnel, there's the inside of the funnel and then there's the outside of the funnel, okay? So Atik is the inside of the funnel, so to speak, which is the most connected to Atzilus. So Atik is technically kind of a world, but it's the world that is not a world, if that makes any sense. So it's the one, not a world, I wouldn't call it a world, it's the level of Kesser that is the most connected to the infiniteness of Hashem. Now, after Atik, or the outside of Atik, is called Arech Ampin. Arech Ampin is the beginning. That's the source of the different worlds. So from Arech Ampin, we get Chachma, we get Bina. And when, in Kabbalah, when we speak about the three fathers, which we're going to discuss, the three heads, the supernal heads, we're talking about the levels of Kesser, Chachma, and Bina. When we count Kesser, we do not count Das. There's no point in discussing it now, but just have that in mind. That's one of the rules in Kabbalah. When we discuss Kesser, 1, 2, 3, we don't count Das, okay? Then after Bina, we start going into the Seder Stalshus. And again, I didn't draw all the Seder Stalshus because we're going to get into it later. But Seder Stalshus, has all the 4 worlds. Within each of the 4 worlds, we have the 10 emanations, the 10 spheres within each of the 4 worlds. And they lead one into the other, into the other, into the other, into the other, until we get to our physical world down here. Okay? So we go from Atzilus, we go to Kesser. Hashem creates something that is the most godly part that's still within a separateness of him, so to speak. And within Kesser, there's 2 levels. There's Atik, and then there's Arech Ampin. Arech Ampin is the level that starts to create, that starts to touch Chachma. Chachma is this concept of separate, not separate, like the essence, the seed, like when you plant the seed, there's nothing to it. Once the seed gets planted, then the seed starts to sprout, and then Bina are basically the sprouts that come out and they make this a reality. So for example, when I had an idea, I would love if everybody in the Chassidus would learn a Maamer together, that was the essential seed. I'm like, wow, so many people could gain from learning a Maamer. And then came the idea, okay, how do we make that happen? And then we sprouted that idea into separate entities, and then that was Bina, okay? Then from Bina, we go to Seder Stalshus. Seder Stalshus creates us. Okay, now that we know that, let's see if we're able to, let's see inside the Maamer. So now let's open up our Maamer to page 26. Which is the 3rd ice. So for anybody using a different print, we're up to the 3rd chapter. And let's get right into it, okay? So we're going to begin, as I told everybody, let's hold cup, because it's Kabbalah, okay? To explain Chassidus site, Avodas HaKodesh. And Avodas HaKodesh is a sefer in Kabbalah, okay? That the aforementioned statement of our sages, for what does the Holy One, blessed be he, care? Refers, meaning what does the Eibusher care? Who's the Eibusher in this sentence, so to speak? Refers to the singular master source of all sources. And we learn from here that that's the terminology that the Avodas HaKodesh uses to connect this whole concept. On the one hand, it says master, which means master, it matters to me, right? As a master to a servant, there is a There is something that a master needs from a servant. On the other hand, the word singular means that he's not like any other master. He's not the typical, master that has servants that, make a difference to him. So we're playing around with this concept. Singular master, source of all sources, who is indeed not concerned at all over the performance of mitzvahs. However, for the sake of glory, to influence the supernal heads and to unify the beginning of thought with its end, meaning the performance of mitzvahs is an absolute necessity. Okay, so 1 second, we just jumped off. So what does it mean, singular master, source of all, singular master, source of all sources, right? So it's this play between a part of Hashem that cares and a part of Hashem that doesn't care, who is indeed not concerned at all with the performance of mitzvahs, right? So supposedly it doesn't make a difference to him. However, for the sake of glory, and what's glory? Glory is something you do, you put on, so let's read footnote 26. Glory is an essential state, glory is not an essential state, but rather a state of vestment, similar to clothing that a person wears, but it is not a part of the person himself. Serving Hashem glorifies him, just as a servant glorifies the king by performing his service. However, the service of Hashem does not affect God directly. It only adds glory to the level of godliness that is vested within the spiritual world, not to God's essence. Okay, so now what are we explaining? It means that we do, to a certain extent, when we do a mitzvah, just like we glorify something, we're glorifying a level of Hashem that already has started to become separate entities, so to speak. So our mitzvahs are glorifying a piece of him, but it's not glorifying the essence of him. So to give a relevant example, when I get up in the morning and I say, you know what, I want to look really beautiful. I want to feel powerful and beautiful today. So on the one hand, I wear beautiful clothes and it glorifies me. It makes me look amazing, and to a certain level, it does make me feel nice. But if I'm dealing with a big struggle, if I'm dealing with a deeper struggle within me, then that glory isn't going to make a difference. It's going to make me feel good to the level of I feel like I look good, but it's not going to affect the essence of me. If I need to cry, I'm still going to have to cry, So there is also that separation, that difference, so to speak, lahavdil to a certain extent, but so to speak, there is that different separation within us, okay? So this glory, for the sake of glory, to influence the supernal heads, and what do we say the supernal heads were? Keser, Chachma, and Bina, right? So in order for our avodah to glorify these supernal heads and to unify the beginning of thought with its end, meaning that Hashem when he created the world, what was the beginning of thought? He wanted us to do good things. He wanted us to connect to him. And so in order to connect the beginning of thought, his desire to the end, which is we do good things, we learn Torah, we do mitzvahs, etc. It is absolutely necessary, right? However, for the sake of glory, to influence the supernal heads and to unify beginning of thought with its end, the performance of mitzvahs is absolutely necessary, right? So there is a point where when we do mitzvahs, we do actually, finish. We make that connection where we do glorify a level of Hashem. This means that at the level of the singular master, source of all sources, avodah is not at all applicable, only with the vestment in Seder Hishtalshlus, starting with the aspect of Chachma, which begins Hishtalshlus. Chachma is called the beginning, and even higher at the level of Keser, in its lower part called Arich, which is the source of emanations, is the concept of avodah indeed applicable, but not to Atik, in the innermost aspect of Keser. Okay, so now, going back to our diagram. What did this just explain? It explained that for this level of Atzilus, our avodah, at this point in our Maamer, our avodah does not make a difference. It doesn't affect Atzilus because the essence of him doesn't get any better just because we wear nicer clothes, so to speak, right? If whatever is going on with Hashem is still going on with Hashem. That said, at the level below, which is Seder Hishtalshlus, we do affect Hashem. We are able to glorify him. At the level of Bina, Chachma, and Keser, to a certain extent, we also affect Hashem when we do Torah mitzvahs. And not only that, but we do it all the way to the level of Arich Ampin, to the external level of Keser. When we do something, we actually make an effect on Hashem. We actually make a difference to the Eibishter. We do glorify, we add his power, all of these good things, right? So how amazing is that? By you guys learning Torah, by all of us sitting here together learning Torah, we're actually making effect all the way through Seder Shalshus to Bina, to Chachma, and to the lower external part of Keser, which is called Arich Ampin. Okay, so we are making a difference, and now we can understand why there's a certain level of Hashem that doesn't affect, and there's a certain level where it does. Okay, now to understand this even better, let me make another, let me explain another piece, which will give us an introduction to the next part of the Maamer. Okay, so we have a water bottle. Okay, within the water bottle, I have water. So the water bottle is the keli, it's the container, and the water within it is the earth, the light, so to speak, the thing that goes inside. Okay, so if chas v'shalom there is a hole in this keli, my light, my water would be spilling out, and the keli would be defective. Now imagine you run a winery, okay? And suddenly you realize that your winery production is going very, very smoothly, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And then you see, oh shucks, the entire bottling section of the winery, all of the bottles somehow are coming out defective, and it has a hole on the bottom. So every time the machine puts wine inside the keli, inside the bottle, all the wine is spilling out. And to a certain extent, it affects that wine, it affects that keli, and it affects the wine that's going in it. But if you think about it deeply, you realize you're going to have to stop the production of the entire winery because of the defective keli, right? So being that this is defective, you can't just continue running and constantly spilling wine into broken bottles. That would be a disaster. It'd be such a huge mess. So what happens is that it stops the production of the wine, even to the source, that if it's such a big deal, obviously, hopefully companies are prepared to deal with such a thing in a smoother way. But let's say it's a brand new company, they're not prepared whatsoever. So they would have to reach up to the stages beforehand in making wine and say, hey, maybe we should even stop planting the seeds of the next grapes because we haven't figured out how to get the system going smoothly, right? So you have to call the truck that brings the wine to the winery. You have to call the people dealing with I just know about winery because my husband has dealt with winery. You have to call the people that pick up the grapes. You have to call the machine that squishes and takes out all the juice from them. And you have it essentially, as much as it's a little tiny hole just on the keli, it actually affects the ore, right? It affects the wine that goes in here, but it also can affect the ore all the way back, tracking to picking the grapes to begin with. Okay, so now that we understand this concept, let's see how the Maamer uses this concept. Okay, we're on page 30, back on the regular text of the Maamer. Defective kelim. The explanation of how avodah can affect the higher realms begins with chachma. Is that the avodah is applicable in Seder Shalshus to both kelim and to others. Okay, so even within Seder Shalshus, each one of the worlds is a keli, and Hashem is the one that sends light through all of them, and each one it's a keli, it's a receptacle, it receives, right? But it's getting light from Hashem himself, and it goes down all the way to the point that we get light here, we get the life source, right? And that's why we exist, because Hashem sent light all the way through all the kelim. Okay. The idea of kelim is that they conceal the light, allowing the existence of another entity. For when light shines, only the source of the light is present, leaving no room for another entity. Okay, so in let's say, what's a good example of this? trying to figure out how to use that with the like winery, meaning in the essence, in the big ginormous batch of wine, it's just wine. You can't see the difference of, you know, what is going to end up in one separate bottle and another separate bottle, but essentially it needs to go through all these kalim, whether it's tubes or trucks or, you know, bats or whatever, and then go down into what is actually going to become invested in this particular bottle. Okay. So the idea of kalim is that they conceal the light, right? So on the one hand, it conceals what's inside, allowing the existence of another entity. So that way I'm able to have, from the same batch of a ginormous gallons of wine, I'm able to have separate bottles. It's concealing the unification between all of them, but it's able to give me a separateness between them, but it's still the same essence. It's still the same wine, right? So allowing the existence of another entity for when light shines, only the source, meaning at the source of the light, is present, leaving no room for another entity. So at that place, we don't have that. By contrast, kalim are the concealment of light that allows for the existence of another, to the extent that after much histalshlus, creations are distinct entities, meaning distinct entities are actually created from them, right? So even though we can't see each separate bottle of wine within the source of wine, once we put it through all the systems, we're actually able to put one separate bottle, one separate bottle, one separate bottle, one separate bottle, okay? Since the idea of kalim is the presence of another, and in the end, after much histalshlus, distinct creations are actually created by way of them. The service of created beings can have an influence at the level of kalim. This means that when avodah is lacking, it causes a defect in the kalim. Okay, so every time chas v'shalom, somebody doesn't, you know, keep whatever level of mitzvahs, the Torah mitzvahs, whatever. So we are affecting the kalim, right? Because each one of these is a keli. It's a receptacle, and each one of the receptacles is getting a blemish on it, so to speak, like a little tiny hole on the bottle, and therefore it's actually affecting the kalim. It's affecting these pieces. That said, over here there's no kalim. This is the essence of everything, right? So over here it's affecting the kalim. Light without purpose. Or on page 32. Light without purpose. Furthermore, avodah affects even the light. For although the lack of avodah actually affects directly only the kalim and not the light, nevertheless, the defect in the keli causes the light to depart from the keli. Departure from the keli affects the light as well, since the purpose of light is to shine within the kalim. Thus, when the light departs from the keli, it no longer serves its purpose. This is how avodah affects the light as well, since the lack of avodah causes the light to depart from the keli, and as a result, the light's purpose is not fulfilled. Moreover, avodah has an effect even on the light that transcends investment into kalim, since even this light is still the source of the light that becomes vested within the kalim. Okay, so now I just said a lot. Let's explain it with the diagram, okay? So if, the same thing with the bottling company, right? If chas v'shalom, somebody here, down here in our world, does something that makes a little tiny hole, chas v'shalom, in one of the pieces of the keli. So that winery, so to speak, the light that's flowing down, reaches a point where it's like, wait a minute, this keli is broken. So not only does it affect the light that reaches to this point, but kind of like we said earlier, with the example of the winery, if all the bottles are broken, or at least one of the bottles is broken, it's going to eventually affect the steps above it, because we're going to have to send a message saying, wait, there's an issue on this keli, so the light can't be flowing down smoothly. Okay, so not only are we affecting the light by having a little blemish, we're also affecting the keli above it, because that stops the light from flowing smoothly all through. And not only that, but we're going to start to affect the actual source of light. So we're going to have to send a message all the way up here and say, whoa. There's a blemish in the system. There's a blemish in the flow of light. So therefore, we're going to have to send that light back up, so to speak, or we're going to have to, something's going to have to be fixed in this system. So what we're saying here, according to Kabbalah, is that even though our actions technically only affect things that have kalim, right? The level of kalim, which is down here, and all we do is technically technically affect the little keli. But in reality, by affecting that keli, we're also affecting the light source that flows downwards, because light can't, just like the wine bottle can't hold the wine if it has a hole in it, so too a keli can't hold, a receptacle can't hold the light that comes into it if it has a blemish in it. So not only are we affecting the keli, we're also affecting the flow of light in of itself. Okay? Now, continuing on, page 32. Source of all sources. This is why avodah affects arich. So even though we said it only affects, this is why it reaches all the way to the point, even though our keli may not be making an issue, because over here we just have a little blemish on one of the things, we're affecting all the way to arich anpin, which is a part of keser. Okay. This is why avodah affects arich. For arich is the source of emanations, and since avodah has an effect on the emanations, the kelim that come down that make seder shtalshlus, as mentioned above, that avodah has an effect even on the light. Avodah affects even the source of emanations. In other words, it even affects arich. It even affects this level within keser. So even though keser is like the most tangible, if that makes any sense. Even that part that is like beyond tangibility, even that part we're able to affect by our avodah. By us learning and by us doing Torah mitzvahs, we're actually glorifying this level of keser. We're glorifying this piece that isn't even a separateness, so to speak. It is only regarding Atik that our sages said, for what does the Holy One, blessed be he, care? Since Atik is the singular master source of all sources, pointedly called the source of all sources, not the source of emanations. For Atik is beyond being the source of emanations. In truth, Atik is distinct even from sources, since the word Atik is derived from the Hebrew word vayatek, and he distanced, indicating that this distance even from arich, being called the source of all sources only figuratively, at this level, avodah has no effect. And about this, the pasuk says, if you sin, what do you do against him? If your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give him? Okay, so just to finish off, I know we're 2 minutes out. Sorry, I apologize. But just to finish off, here's how it works. Let's do it in the positive. When we do a mitzvah, we give goodness, and we make a good keli here, a good keli here, a good keli here, a good keli here, to the point that we give nachas to the Eibusher, even in the level of keser, albeit the outer level of keser, which is arich anpin, but also to a certain extent we're able to affect, and we'll explain this in the future classes, we'll be able to affect the light in of itself, which means we also to a certain extent affect the level a drop higher. So our avodah actually makes a huge impact. It makes a huge impact in the emanations, in the worlds below. But we're saying that even here in the source of all sources, we didn't say the source of emanations, we said the source of sources. So even up here, we're making an impact. So we're giving nachas to the Eibusher in every single level, all the way to the closest piece right before Atzilus. Okay? So now I hope everybody followed, and I hope it was clear. Tomorrow we're going to discuss even more, and I hope if you have any questions, I'm going to turn off the recording. Please feel free to ask questions. I know we've covered a lot of Kabbalah today.